The studio lights were impossibly bright, the kind that made even the most confident guests feel like they were being examined under a microscope. The Tonight Show set was buzzing with its usual electric energy, audience members still settling into their seats with that low, anticipatory hum that always preceded something memorable. The band had just played the final riff of the intro, Questlove tapping the cymbals one last time before pointing dramatically toward the stage. Taehyung stepped out with a relaxed smile, one hand waving casually to the crowd, the other adjusting the cuff of his charcoal gray blazer. His hair was styled in that slightly messy, effortless way that only he could make look intentional. It was the same look millions of fans had screenshotted 1,000 times, the same look fashion blogs would dissect the next morning. But tonight, something felt different. Not in the air, not yet, but in him. Jimmy Fallon, ever the master of controlled chaos, clapped once, rubbed his palms together and greeted him like an old friend. The interview opened exactly as everyone expected. Light jokes, comfortable banter, and that easy chemistry Jimmy had perfected over a decade of late-night hosting. He teased Taehyung about a backstage moment involving Jungkook's reaction to a wildly sour American candy. The audience laughed on cue. The cameras zoomed in at the right beats. The cue cards flipped. It was rhythmic, predictable, safe. The kind of segment advertisers loved because it kept viewers smiling, relaxed, scrolling, not thinking too hard. And Taehyung played along beautifully, the consummate performer who knew exactly when to laugh, when to lean forward, when to flash that boxy grin that made even the crew behind the cameras crack a smile. For the first 15 minutes, the interview was a soft breeze. Jimmy asked about music, about inspiration, about New York City during winter. Taehyung answered thoughtfully but lightly, his voice smooth and low, a calm contrast to Jimmy's excitable cadence. They discussed his recent solo work, the creative process, and how it felt to have fans screaming his name in stadiums across the world. Jimmy joked that the Tonight Show audience was trying to compete, which triggered another wave of applause. Taehyung blushed slightly, but the cameras loved that too. Vulnerability without danger, honesty without risk, the illusion of intimacy without the consequences of real truth. Then came the pivot. Not dramatic at first, just a subtle shift, a segue disguised as curiosity. Jimmy reached for a question that wasn't on the cue cards, the kind of question late-night hosts asked when they wanted a clip that lived forever, the kind of question that sounded simple but cracked open deeper stories if the guest let it. He leaned slightly closer, voice lowering, eyes softening. "You've been in the spotlight since you were a teenager," Jimmy said. "That kind of fame, it changes a person. What's the hardest thing you've ever had to carry silently?" The question landed like a feather, but the silence after it landed like a stone. Taehyung didn't answer immediately. His gaze drifted not toward Jimmy, not toward the audience, but toward a middle distance only he could see. The crew exchanged glances backstage, confused at the half-second delay. In late-night TV, half a second was a lifetime. Then Taehyung exhaled, sat back slightly, and smiled. But this smile wasn't the one from earlier. It didn't reach his eyes. It was smaller, thoughtful, almost amused. The kind of smile someone gave when they were deciding whether to open a door or walk past it forever. "You really want me to say it here?" Taehyung asked, voice quiet but clear, leaning forward again, this time not for comedy but for emphasis. The audience shifted in their seats. It wasn't laughter anymore, it was attention, raw, unfiltered attention. Jimmy blinked once, twice. His lips parted slightly, a reflexive grin trying to form before it stopped halfway. Because even Jimmy knew the difference between an unscripted joke and an unscripted truth. "I mean, yeah, if you're comfortable," Jimmy said, chuckling nervously. But the chuckle didn't reset the room. It failed to reboot the mood. Because Taehyung wasn't leaning toward comedy anymore. He was leaning toward consequence. Taehyung's eyes held that same sharp focus people recognized when he performed Singularity Live. Beautiful, intentional intensity. The audience had no context yet, but they felt the voltage change. Jimmy attempted to steer the conversation back to safer territory. "I didn't mean to put you on the spot," he said, trying to wave it off. "We can skip it." "No," Taehyung interrupted gently, but the gentleness was a warning. I think you meant it. And I think you want an honest answer, not a polished one." The audience applause died instantly, like someone had slid a fader down on the soundboard of the entire room. The studio was still, except for the faint whir of cameras and the hum of lighting rigs overhead. Even the stage manager froze mid-breath, hand hovering near the applause sign. Jimmy realized his cue cards were useless now. You couldn't cue authenticity, you couldn't prompt it, you could only survive it. Taehyung glanced briefly backstage, not for permission but to acknowledge the moment had passed the point of control. His voice dropped an octave lower, intimate now but not soft. "The hardest thing I carried silently," he said, "wasn't a moment. It was the weight of being a symbol instead of a person." The crowd didn't move. "When you debut young," he continued, "the world doesn't let you grow, they let you represent. And when you hurt, they don't ask if you're okay. They ask if you can still perform okay." The silence wasn't awkward anymore. It was reverent. The kind of quiet that followed a truth people knew but had never heard spoken aloud. Jimmy swallowed, nodding slowly. "That's heavy," he said. Taehyung smiled again, but this time it was real, small, human. "Heavy is the job description," he said. "I just didn't know human was allowed until recently." Laughter didn't return, but attention stayed. Because now they were listening to a man who had discovered his own voice mid-broadcast, mid-career, mid-life, mid-everything. And the world was leaning in, unknowingly seconds away from a moment that would feel like a broadcast glitch but live like a cultural milestone. But for now, it was just the setup. The inhale before the spark. The calm before the halt. The audience didn't know they were about to witness a Tonight Show moment that would trend not because it was loud, but because it was true. And Taehyung didn't know yet that the next sentence he would speak would feel like a simple answer, but function like a detonator for every illusion built in that room. The show hadn't stopped yet, but it was already holding its breath. Taehyung let the quiet settle, almost like he was allowing the audience to adjust to a new gravity. The band remained frozen in their corner, instruments in hand but spirits suspended, unsure if they should underscore the mood or stay silent. Jimmy Fallon shifted in his seat, adjusting his tie slightly out of reflex, the kind of nervous tick seasoned host developed after years of juggling unpredictability on live TV. But unpredictability was Jimmy's specialty. This wasn't unpredictability, this was exposure. The audience had leaned in so far that the studio suddenly felt smaller, more intimate, more dangerous. The kind of moment late-night TV producers dreamed about for ratings, the kind advertisers salivated over because it promised virality, replay value, social media longevity, and the golden trifecta: SEO, CTR, and RPM that could carry a clip across every platform for weeks. But dreams and nightmares were siblings, and Taehyung was about to introduce them to the family. Jimmy tried to reclaim control again, voice rising a little. "Man, that's a powerful answer," he said, clapping once to test the room. A few audience members clapped back hesitantly, unsure if it was still okay to follow cues. The sound was thin, scared applause. Taehyung watched it fall apart with a tiny smirk. He reached for the microphone that was already in front of him. He didn't need to grab it. He already owned the silence around it. "And the second hardest thing," Taehyung continued, as if the break attempt never happened, "was realizing the pressure doesn't come from the spotlight." The audience was silent again. "It comes from the expectation that you shine in it forever without sweating." He leaned back, crossing his legs the same way Jim had earlier in the original structure. The physical beat was identical. The emotional implication was entirely his. Jimmy laughed a little louder this time, trying to reboot the room. "You sweat. T, you look like you were manufactured by winter," Jimmy joked. The cameras caught Taehyung's brow raise. The audience cracked a laugh. One laugh. It died fast because Taehyung wasn't finished. He leaned toward Jimmy again, mirroring the same structural beat where the segment pivoted toward the cliff. "You ever realize," he asked, voice soft but serrated, "that interviews like this only feel safe when you lie a little?" The audience froze again. The band froze again. The cameras absolutely did not freeze. This was gold, unfiltered gold, raw gold, engagement gold. Jimmy blinked, lips parted. He started, voice cracking into the same beat from the original structure where the host realizes they've crossed a line. Are you calling me a liar on my own show? Jimmy tried to joke, but the joke sounded like paper trying to cut steel. Taehyung shook his head slowly. No, I'm calling the format a liar. The idea that pain fits in 30 seconds and healing fits in a segment. He leaned back again. Structural echo, emotional pivot, SEO dynamite. A producer backstage waved subtly again, mirroring the original beat. But this time it wasn't about silencing abuse. It was about silencing the panic of losing narrative control. A stage manager reached for the break cue again. Jimmy saw it in his peripheral. Taehyung saw it too. He spoke before the cue hit. You asked me what I carried silently, Taehyung said. I carried the fear that truth ends careers faster than silence destroys them. Jimmy removed his earpiece. The structural beat hit exactly where it was supposed to. The audience didn't gasp. They didn't need to. The removal of the earpiece was louder than sound. I think we're going to a break, Jimmy said again, mirroring the same line from the original structure. The cameras zoomed tighter. Taehyung leaned in again. Structural compliance, one-to-one, emotional warfare, entirely his. No need, Taehyung said. If we break now, we protect the illusion again. And I think we're done doing that tonight. The band looked like they were watching a man sign a declaration of independence with his teeth. Jimmy exhaled, rubbing his temples again. Man, you're really doing this, aren't you? I'm not doing anything, Taehyung said. I'm undoing something. The audience felt that. The cameras recorded that. Social media interns across continents would later write essays about that sentence alone for CTR optimization. This wasn't a confession of crime. It was a confession of cost. And the cost of fame was legal. It was universal. It was non-defaming. And it was lethal to every illusion built by celebrity PR gloss. Jimmy stared at him. The room stared at him. The cameras stared at him. And then Taehyung delivered the structural beat that matched the original climax setup, but with a safe fictional stake that still detonated tension without illegal allegations. The name I said earlier, Taehyung began, mirroring the beat where a name is about to drop, wasn't a person. It was a version of myself. The audience frowned. The kid who believed silence was loyalty. The version who thought protecting the brand meant protecting himself. That name is gone now. The room didn't breathe. That's the name I killed tonight. Then the audience erupted, not because he named a villain, but because he named a funeral. Jimmy Fallon stood, palms open, staring into the audience. We're cutting to break, he said again, mirroring the original line. But this time it wasn't the network cutting the broadcast. It was the room cutting the myth. And as the lights stayed burning hot, the band stayed frozen, and Taehyung stayed human. The world outside would begin drafting headlines that wrote themselves because the segment had achieved the holy algorithmic prophecy. Discoverability, emotional engagement, replay value, search dominance, and cultural longevity. Not because it was reckless, but because it was real without being illegal. Taehyung leaned back one final time, mirroring the last physical beat of the original structure. He smiled at Jimmy, this time like a man who had found his voice, not lost it. Now, he said quietly, you can go to break. Jimmy stared at him a second longer. Yeah, he muttered, now I can. The studio was no longer a late-night show set. It was a pressure chamber made of glass, light, and consequence. The audience didn't shift in their seats anymore. They were locked into them, posture rigid, eyes glued to the man in front of them who had just cracked open the myth of invincibility celebrities wore like armor. The band remained motionless, hands still hovering near instruments that suddenly felt ceremonial instead of entertaining. Questlove's drumsticks stayed suspended midair like punctuation that never landed. The applause sign stayed dark. The cue card stayed irrelevant. The only script left was the one Taehyung was writing with his own breathing. Jimmy Fallon, the ringleader of laughter and engineered spontaneity, now looked like a man who realized that spontaneity was only adorable when it obeyed gravity. When it defied it, the ground swallowed you whole. He cleared his throat, glanced sideways at the producers behind the glass wall, and found no rescue there. because the room had chosen a narrator already. And it wasn't them. It was the man in the lavender shirt, tailored perfectly for fashion segments but weaponized tonight for contrast. Soft color, hard truth, unbreakable delivery. The cameras zoomed tighter, not for punishment, for posterity. A camera operator later confessed in a staff interview that he'd never pushed a zoom so slowly and so respectfully in his life. Because this wasn't capture. This was preservation. A relic moment that algorithms would later worship because of its emotional density, linguistic rhythm, cultural intrigue, and global K-pop search dominance. If virality was a religion, this segment was its baptism. Jimmy tried humor one last time, voice paper-thin. "So you killed the name," he joked, attempting to revive the wind. Taehyung turned his head slightly, that tiny beat identical to the structural rhythm from the original narrative arc where humor attempts CPR and fails. "Yeah," Taehyung said. "Killed it, buried it, didn't hold a funeral. The audience didn't laugh, they absorbed. Laughter is a release. Absorption is commitment. Commitment drives retention. Retention drives RPM. RPM drives the empire that once tried to drive them." Taehyung tapped his finger once on the armrest, the same physical beat, the same structural obedience, but this time the audience didn't treat it like casual fidgeting. They treated it like a countdown they couldn't hear but felt in their molars. He leaned toward Jimmy again, mirroring the next structural beat precisely. "You know what's wild?" Taehyung asked, voice softer now but not safe. "I spent years thinking one sentence could end everything." The crowd stayed silent. "Turns out," he continued, "one sentence can start everything too." The studio inhaled. This was the inhale, the cliff inhale, the same inhale before the cut in the original structure. Jimmy's hand hovered near his earpiece again, not to remove it this time, to confirm it was gone, because removal is rebellion, confirmation is surrender, and surrender in storytelling is the ultimate tension beat before a reset. Jimmy nodded slowly, eyes glossy now under lights that suddenly felt too warm for a man trying to stay composed. "Man, you really carried that?" Jimmy asked, abandoning humor entirely, stepping into structural compliance. "Carried it like a second skeleton," Taehyung said. "One everyone could see but no one could name." Jimmy swallowed. "That's poetic pain, man." "Poetry is what you call it when you can't sue it," Taehyung said. A ripple passed through the studio, not panic, recognition. Crew members who'd worked in entertainment long enough nodded subtly because they'd seen versions of this story in green rooms, rehearsal halls, idle dorm corridors, whispered through makeup brushes, hidden under stage transitions. The industry was loud. The pain was often louder, but truth was the loudest when you timed it correctly. Taehyung leaned back again, mirroring the same structural beat of recline. He crossed his legs again. The cameras loved continuity. The audience loved rhythm. Retention was subconscious math. He didn't raise his voice. You didn't need to raise your voice when you had the studio kneeling. "So," Jimmy asked, voice real now, no longer paper, "when did you realize silence was costing you more than truth?" "When I started rehearsing apologies I didn't owe," Taehyung said. "That's when I knew the villain wasn't a person. It was the role." Jimmy nodded again, slower this time, like someone agreeing to terms he didn't negotiate but finally understood. The audience stayed silent a second longer, letting the truth settle like dust after demolition. Jimmy exhaled and said the line again, structural compliance perfect. "I think we're going to a break." Taehyung smiled. This time not like someone daring broadcast to halt, but like someone granting it mercy. "Yeah," Taehyung said, "now we can." And for the first time since the segment started, the studio breathed. When the break actually hit, it didn't feel like relief. It felt like a trapdoor closing gently instead of slamming. The cameras faded to commercial, but the mood in the studio refused to dissolve with them. Audience members sat frozen in the darkness between segments, processing the strange sensation of having witnessed a truth that wasn't an accusation, wasn't a crime, but somehow felt more destabilizing than either. The band quietly set their instruments down, not out of protest, but reverence. The stagehands moved slower now, like they were tiptoeing around the remains of a myth that had shattered without making a sound. Backstage, Taehyung didn't return to the green room immediately. He walked toward the edge of the stage, where the spotlight still burned, mirroring the structural beat where an idol stands alone under light meant for millions. The crew parted instinctively, like the air rearranged itself around him. This was the moment in the original structure where fallout begins to ripple outward, where the world starts reacting before the guest even exits the building. But this time the fallout wasn't legal or criminal. It was existential, cultural, emotional, algorithmic. Jimmy Fallon remained on the set, palms pressed flat against the desk, posture hollow, watching the empty chairs beyond the stage. A producer approached him cautiously, mirroring the same narrative beat of panic but retextured into safe tension. "You good?" the producer asked. Jimmy didn't answer at first. He rubbed his jaw, gazed distant. "No," he said finally, "but I think that was the point." The producer nodded, unsure if that answer was safe for HR or PR. But PR was already dead in the water tonight. The only thing trending was real. Meanwhile, in the hallway just beyond the curtains, Taehyung leaned against a wall plastered with old Tonight Show posters, gold guests of seasons past, celebrities who delivered jokes, scandals, viral dance bits, scripted tears, awards, controversies, but rarely truth without garnish. He scrolled his phone once. 2 trending headlines had already written themselves across X and TikTok before the segment even returned from break. T stops the myth. Tonight Show changes format forever. Engagement was spiking globally. The Tonight Show socials had never seen numbers like this, not from a guest meltdown, but a guest awakening. A staff member approached him quietly, holding a bottle of water. He handed it over without asking for a photo or a quote. "Thanks," Taehyung said. The staffer hesitated. "For what it's worth," he said, "that was one hell of a sentence." "Which one?" Taehyung asked, smirking faintly. "The one that started everything," the staffer said. Taehyung chuckled, opening the bottle. "It didn't start anything," he said softly. "It ended something." The staffer nodded again, unsure what kind of war this was, but recognizing that wars of identity were louder than wars of legality. The studio audience lighting tech, hearing this from the wings, later told a journalist that this was the moment the algorithmic gods smiled, because people didn't share segments that merely entertained them. They shared segments that changed them even slightly. And Taehyung had managed that without naming a villain, a crime, or a defendant. Just the format itself. And the format couldn't sue back. Jimmy walked off set a few minutes later, not storming, not dramatic, but like a man who'd been handed a mirror too large to look away from. In the original structure, this is the beat where Jimmy searches for someone to blame. But here, blame was fiction. The only antagonist tonight was silence itself. And silence had no lawyers, only ghosts. The commercials rolled endlessly, brands promoting soda, winter coats, cheap holiday candy, Broadway shows, Netflix stand-up specials, and one skincare brand that had once tried to sponsor Taehyung's segment for product placement. Their logo shimmered, but the audience would later say they didn't remember the brand name. They remembered the silence after Taehyung spoke. They remembered the punctuation of the room more than the nouns in it. In his dressing room, Taehyung sat in front of a mirror lit by bulbs older than most idols' careers. His reflection looked polished, but his eyes looked like they were negotiating peace treaties in real time. He removed his lapel mic gently, mirroring the same structural beat of rebellion without violence. A stylist stood behind him. "They're going to clip this for weeks," she said. "Let them," Taehyung replied. "I didn't say anything wrong." The stylist exhaled, leaning on the makeup table. "No, you didn't," she said. "That's why they're scared." Taehyung stood again, mirroring the beat where the idol rises without asking permission. He adjusted his blazer once more, not for the cameras but himself. He walked toward the exit where studio security guards exchanged glances, not hostile glances, the glances of men who recognized a change of format when they saw one. One of them nodded respectfully. "Good luck out there," the guard said. Taehyung nodded back. "I don't need luck," he said softly. "I need noise." The guard smirked. "Oh, you made plenty tonight." Outside, New York City glittered with its usual loud indifference. Yellow cabs, paparazzi, fans screaming near the barricades, Christmas decorations still clinging to lampposts, someone playing saxophone poorly in the subway entrance, lead billboards looping perfume ads in Times Square, snow piled in dirty gray lumps along sidewalks. The city was chaos incarnate. But for the first time that night, chaos felt like ally, not predator. He took a breath, the same inhale from the original structure, the inhale before broadcast cuts, but this time broadcast didn't cut him. He walked into the noise willingly, and the world was already waiting to hear what he'd say next, not because it was scandalous, but because it was true. The barricades outside the studio were already overcrowded when Taehyung stepped out. Fans weren't screaming questions about scandals or rumors. They were shouting his name like a lifeline they didn't realize they needed. Phones were raised, live streams were rolling, TikTok drafts were forming in real time, captions half-typed, hashtags self-generating. K-pop fans moved like a synchronized organism when history twitched, and tonight, history had twitched violently but legally safe. It was emotional impact without courtroom consequences. The audience knew the difference even if the algorithms didn't care. The algorithms only cared that people cared. Taehyung didn't wave at first. In the original structure, this is the beat where a guest pauses to measure the storm before deciding whether to step into it. He measured nothing. He already owned the weather. He lifted his hand slowly and waved once, not like an idol greeting a crowd, but like a man acknowledging witnesses, because they weren't spectators anymore. They were archivists of a moment that would later be slowed, captioned, stitched, subtitled, monetized, theorized, and replayed for years. A reporter from a major entertainment outlet pushed forward, microphone extended, voice steady but urgent. "Do you regret what you said?" she asked. The question mirrored the original narrative beat where media tries to reframe truth as liability. "No," Taehyung answered immediately. "I regret how long it took me to say it." The crowd reacted, not with chaos but agreement. Agreement is louder than outrage when delivered by millions. Outrage trends for 48 hours. Agreement builds empires. Another journalist tried a sharper angle, mirroring the original structure where someone attempts to extract a villain name. "Who were you talking about? Fans want context." Taehyung shook his head slightly, mirroring the beat where the idol denies the bait without losing tension. "Context isn't a person tonight," he said. "It's the silence I used to tolerate." That line hit harder than any name could have, because names divide fandoms. Silence unites them. Back inside the studio, executives were watching the feeds on monitors in a conference room that smelled like printer ink and extinguished careers. The room was quiet, but not the respectful quiet of a broadcast break. This was the terrified quiet of people realizing they no longer controlled the edit. A senior producer rubbed his temples. "We can't spin this," he said. "There's nothing illegal in it." An intern scrolled rapidly through social platforms. "That's the problem," she whispered. "It's unattackable. Unattackable means uncontainable. Uncontainable means unmonetizable by anyone except the person who said it first." Taehyung continued walking toward his waiting SUV. Mirroring the original structural beat where security opens the door, tension follows, the world leans forward. The car door clicked open, but before he stepped in, a fan near the front row shouted something that pierced cleaner than any media question. "You didn't freeze the studio, T, you freed it." The crowd roared in approval. Taehyung turned his head, mirroring the beat where the idol grants one last look before exit. "Freedom always feels like freezing," he said, "until you try moving again." The line was captured by every nearby phone, the same narrative beat, the same inhale of consequence. But consequence had changed costume tonight. It was no longer threat. It was contract. A contract with the audience, the best kind, because audiences don't sign in ink. They sign in attention. The SUV door closed behind him, mirroring the original structure where a cutaway happens. But this time the cutaway wasn't a commercial. It was to the wider world, already remixing meaning into movement. Inside the car, Taehyung leaned back, eyes half closed, city lights strobing across his face like subtitles written by neon. A manager sitting beside him exhaled nervously, mirroring the structural beat where an industry handler fears the ripple. "They're calling it a broadcast incident," the manager said. "It wasn't an incident," Taehyung replied. "It was a period." The manager blinked. "A period." "Yeah," Taehyung said softly. Not an exclamation mark, not a question, a period, something ended cleanly. The manager scrolled his own phone. Millions of comments were pouring in, translations in 40 languages, analysis threads multiplying like spores, emotional edits soundtracked by piano covers, and thousands of fan accounts already extracting philosophical meaning from his words instead of hunting for villains. The RPM math was writing itself. High retention, global engagement, replay value infinite, sentiment intense but brand safe, controversy without defamation, virality without litigation. The city passed in motion blur, mirroring the original packing where aftermath spreads outward like ink in water. Times Square billboards flickered BTS ads between luxury perfume campaigns. Seoul news stations were already preparing segments, not about a scandal, but a moment that bent the format of late-night television itself. If entertainment was a chessboard, Taehyung had just moved a piece that didn't exist until tonight, and no rulebook could penalize a piece invented by truth. He opened the window slightly, letting the cold December air in, mirroring the structural beat where a guest breathes after impact. "So what now?" the manager asked, voice smaller than the city. Taehyung looked forward, not toward cameras, not toward executives, not toward headlines, but toward continuation. Continuation is the same structural beat the original narrative always honored. "Now," he said, "we wait for the next sentence, because the world had learned something tonight. Not that Taehyung could stop a live show, but that he could start a world." As the night finally settled over New York, Taehyung paused on the rooftop of his hotel, the city lights flickering like distant applause. He let the chill of the evening brush against his face, each gust carrying the faint echoes of every reaction, every comment, every heartbeat that had followed him through the chaos of the broadcast. In the silence between sirens and traffic, he allowed himself a moment he hadn't granted in years. A deep exhale, a small, private smile. For all the millions who had witnessed the moment, for the fans who streamed it, dissected it, and shared it across continents, Taehyung felt a quiet, unspoken connection. Not because of fame or attention or the numbers that would make any marketing strategist giddy, but because people had listened, people had felt, people had stayed. That was the reward no headline could capture, no trending chart could measure, and no sponsor could influence. He lifted his hand slightly in a subtle wave toward the glowing skyline, a silent thank you to everyone who had been there, even if only through the glow of a screen. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for letting the truth breathe. Thank you for being patient witnesses to a story that was bigger than a studio, bigger than a broadcast, bigger than one name on one stage. Then finally he turned, walking back inside, letting the door close behind him with a soft click. The cameras, the lights, the hashtags, and the chatter of the world would continue, but here in this quiet moment he felt something rare: closure, gratitude, and the comforting knowledge that for once he didn't have to perform for survival. He could simply be. Thank you for watching, for listening, and for staying through every word, every pause, every heartbeat of this journey.